important properties of CSS are there. So there are basically two important things that are needed to be covered. One is okay. One is the styling of the web page, that is the various properties and the values that we add to our web page, right? We'll see the syntax very soon. And the second thing is the positioning of the web page elements, right? So how do you structure the web page elements, and we'll go from there, right? So far we have covered, as I said earlier, right, attributes, properties, and the values. So let me just quickly revise you what are the attributes and the values. So this is your div tag, right? So this is your tag, and now let's say if I write something here, right? So everything that goes inside tag will be coming here. I can open this particular web page. Let me just remind you, you can just go to wherever your this particular file is there, right, and then open it. Just for the reminder, so this particular file that I have saved was in this web dev folder. Even if you don't know where this folder is, you can open your terminal. How did I open my terminal? Is like Control Alt and Tab will open my terminal. I mean, Control and Tab will open my terminal, and you can close the same way. And so Control and this thing will open my terminal. And if you do pwd, it will give you a present working directory. And you can go from here. You can just copy this particular path, go to your file explorer, click on this thing, Control A, and paste this thing. It'll go to that particular folder, right? And it's a little bit slow. The other way around is like, as you already know, it's in desktop folder. So you just go from there. Why it's not opening? So it's open. So this particular web page that is there, you can either open in Edge. By default, it will open in Edge, right? This particular thing. This is my HTML file. So I'll just open in my browser, and this is what is being written. And then we have seen few attributes and the values. Just quickly open in both the tabs side by side, so it's helpful for us. Right. And then we have seen few attributes that you can add. Anything that you add to the tag is your attribute, right? I have seen that to add CSS, all you need is like you need to add this particular attribute called style, right? Once you add the style attribute, in the quoted values, you can add any sort of properties / values. So what could be a property? For example, if I want to add a background color, so all I need to do is I have to write background, right, and then color colon, and whatever the color that I need to add will be my value, right? So let's say if I want to add the value as this particular color, right? Now if I refresh this particular tab, the whole background color is being added to this particular element. So let me just remind you quickly, this is your attribute, this is your property, and these are your values. This is how you write. You can add more things here. The attribute can not just be the style thing. You can add width, right? This is your again another attribute. Here the values that I'm writing here is in pixel by default, right? And you can add in percentage as well. If you want to add in percentage, all you have to do is write in 50 and then percent. So it will take the 50% of your thing, right? Let me just change it to 50 pixel. Okay. You can add the values in here as well. Like if I add it here width, and if I change it to 200 pixel, and if I refresh it, it will take that amount of width. I can change the height as well, right? Height, I can add it again in pixel, percentage, or whatever the way you want, right? And that much amount of height will be allocated to this one. By default, if you don't give anything, that is, if you don't give either of width or height, then it will take the whole block, right? Whole block. Because why? Because this div element is by default, it takes the whole block, division, the whole division. On the other hand, the span that we have discussed earlier, it takes only the amount of space that it requires. So if I add here background color to make it more clear, So if I add background color as black, let's not add black because it will make it invisible. The color will be invisible. So it will take only that much amount of space. So if I add more span elements here, so more span elements will be added just side by side. But span won't be used a lot in the production. So if you open any website, you will see just div is mostly being used, or a tag that we have discussed. So anyways, let's not get there. We'll discuss few properties that we need to discuss, right? So first thing we'll discuss today, we'll try to create this thing, right? And we have already discussed what is background color. Now there is another property called color, right? Text color is there. So these three properties are usually used to add the color inside your elements. So if you change the color, right, you can either add here color. So what will happen is basically background color will add the background color, but the color property, just the color property, it will add the color to your text, right? Here you can, in VS Code gives you this thing. The color can be added by hovering over this way, right? If I save it again and refresh it, it will add something. But the way color could be added is through various ways. One is just by giving the default value colors that few values of the colors are by default, like white is there, red is there, purple is there. But if you want to get into a niche, you want, okay, by this color has to be not exactly the same, because all the color values are not the same. So you can add any color, right? You click on it. Once you get this red thing, you can here play around, right? You can add and decrease the hover. You can add and decrease the opacity of this one. You can add the color, decrease the color, right? Play around with it. So how this particular color is added is using RGBA format. So you might have already know about this thing. R represents the red, G represents the green, B represents the blue, and A represents the alpha. So R is the redness of this particular color, G is the greenness, and blue represent the blueness of the color, and A is again the alpha, that is the opacity, that is how much transparent you want the color to be. If I make it zero, what will happen is it's gone, right? Because you want the transparency to be zero. And if I make it one, it becomes visible completely. So if you can add this thing, the last thing, that is alpha, between 0 to 1. So you give 0.5, it will be somewhat visible, right? It will be somewhat transparent, right? So this is how you can play with it. This is not the only way. As I said to you earlier, you can remove this A as well, right? It doesn't matter. Now if I remove the last value, it will just add the color and keep the alpha as 1 by default, right? Right, this is how you add the RGB. You can add RGBA format, and now this values which are there inside, it can be from 0 to 255. So I can keep the redness to be 0. Now there is no redness in this particular color, right? I can add this color to be 255 and keep the others as 0 and 0. So what will happen now? You have added just the red color and you haven't added a green or blue color. So in this case, what will happen? It will be completely red. If I add little bit of greenness, what will happen? It is a mixture of red and green. Now if I add little bit of blue as well, what will happen? It is a mixture of red, green, and blue. So this is the color that you got. So the maximum value that you can put for red and green and blue is 0 to 255, not more than that, not less than that. So basically the principle is that any color in the world, any color that you see that a human eye can visualize, can be made using these three colors, that is red, green, and blue. And now you can add from 0 to 255. You just add the amount, the intensity of that individual color, right? So this is how you can add the color and the background color. Hope this is clear. Next, you have the border property, right? Text color is the same as color. Border property, what it does is basically, let's say if you want, if you open this Zerodha page only, and if you see this particular button, if you see, there is little, slightly, there is a border, clear border, obviously. This is just a border radius, but if you want to add the border, let's just add ourselves and then see from there, right? So now if you want to add more properties, you can, property, value, and colon. This is how you do it. So color is my property, and whatever the value that I have added is my value. And then again, I have to put the colon. Now, if I remove this colon, it won't work. Obviously, this will work, but the next property that I'm gonna add, it won't be added. To add it clearly, the first thing I'll do is increase the width and height, and then we'll go from there. I'll add it to 100 pixel, and see, this is giving me a red squiggly. The reason being, I haven't added a colon, semicolon at the end. So every value, whenever it ends, you need to add a colon so that CSS can interpret, okay, by this property and value is being ended here. So the next thing that starts is another property and value, right? So this is how it goes. So if I add width, I'll just add a little bit of height as well. Right. So a little bit of height and width is there. Now we can add a border property to make it look very clearly. So if I add border, now listen very carefully. The way border property is written, basically you want to add a border, right? So the thing that I have to write is, first is the intensity of the border, right? The intensity of border, how much I want the border to be intense, right? The dimension of it. Then is whether what type of border do I want? Is it solid, or is it dotted, or you have various other properties that you can add. Last is the color of that particular border, right? I'll just explain to you again, but let's see here. So if you see it now, I have added three things in my border. One is 3 pixel, that is that's what it looks like. If I increase it to, let's say, 13, right, what will happen is, and if I refresh it, the border gets more intense, right? If I decrease it to 1, slightly less, right? So this is how I can play with the first property, that is the intensity of my border. Next is solid. What does the solid means? If you see the border here, it is it is it is continuous, but if I want it to be dotted, I can make it dotted as well. Can has various other properties. Now if you see the border, right, I'll just increase the pixels so that you see it very clearly. It is not continuous, it is dotted, right? So this is how the dotted property works. Last thing, obviously, again, the color that you have to add. Here you don't give the semicolons, right? Here again you can play around, right, change it. And the color is very similar, like you can add whenever the color has to be added in any of the property, you can add it using RGBA, or directly you can give some pre-default colors, right? So that's how it works. So now this is done. The border is done. Let me change it to solid, which is the default setting for the color, right? So this is the thing. But now if you see, this border is not really aesthetic, right? If you see this particular button, this button is there, but it has some border radius to it, right? There is some sort of a curve that makes it look better. To add that thing, you can add another property which is called border radius. So let me just remove all this thing because it is getting a lot of cluttered. Let me add another thing. Here I'll add sign up, right? So there's nothing. I'll add some background color so that we get to know, okay, how much amount of space we are utilizing. So background hyphen color will give me the color. I'll add blue to it, or aqua, right? Let me change the width and the height, too much. Right. Now if I want to add the border to it, I'll just add the border first, and then we'll go from border, we'll add border radius. Obviously, if you don't have the border radius doesn't make any sense, right? So if I add border here, and if I do 2 pixels solid black, this will add my border, right? Now if I want to add the border radius, the property is very simple, border hyphen radius. And now again, these are the set of values that you can add, but you can just add in pixels and we'll check from there, right? 5 pixels. Now if I refresh it, now you might see that there is some sort of roundness is added to this particular button, right? Not a button, but a development, right? I can increase it to see it how rounded it can be, right? The more you increase, the more the roundness will be added to that particular button, right? This is how you can play with it. So this is what the border radius property does, right? So these are all the important properties. Yeah, we have padding and margin, very important property. So let's see how padding and margin can be added. To add padding and margin, I'll add few buttons, so it is better for us to understand if we add few buttons from there, right? If I add this here, we'll add two dev elements. Let's keep it simple. Home, another is sign up, right? Now if I refresh it, I have two dev elements aligned next to each other, right? But if I want it to be in the same line, I can change this div to the span because I want it to be in the same line, right? Span. Now if I refresh it, what happens? It comes one next to each other. But the problem is the space that it is acquiring, right? It is really next to each other. I want it to, take little amount of, breadth, right? So how you can add that is using two properties. One is margin, another is padding. So let me try to explain you what is the difference between margin and padding. First, let's add margin. And before we add the margin, uh, let's let me remove this particular sign in button, and add the style property, right? And add the background color. I'll add it, keep it aqua. If I refresh it, what happens? I see, the background colors will occupy by default the whole button, right? Whatever the whole element is there, it will occupy and fill the whole color. So that is the good way to know, okay, by how much this particular element is utilizing the space. Now if I want to give it little bit amount of space, what I can do is I can add padding. If I add, and if I increase, I'll increase it to 2 pixel. Now what will happen is, you see what happened here, right? If I remove this thing and refresh it, there is not lot of breadth in between from H to the end of the button, right? But if I add padding, what happens is some amount of space is added. So this is what we want. Okay, by inside the element, if I want some space, I'll add padding, right? So I hope padding is clear. I can increase more and more, right? Padding, I can increase more and more. And let me just tell you, whenever you add just padding, if you are using the property as padding, it will add the padding to the top, to the left, to the right, and to the bottom by default. If you want to add it, like, to only one side, or if you want, okay, by padding to the left should be less and padding to the right should be, same, so you can use the individual properties. So if I remove this thing, this takes the whole thing. And if I, let's say, if I want individual padding, I just want the padding to the left, not to the right, so I can add here this thing. And now if you see, the padding is being only added to the left, not to the top, not to the right, and not to the bottom. This is how you can play with the padding. I hope this is clear. Now once padding is done, let's understand what margin does. What margin does is basically, let's say you have two elements. You have home, you have sign up. So you have two buttons. Let me add the background color so it becomes pretty clear for you what amount of space is being utilized by individual buttons, right? So let us add here aqua. And now if I add it here, style, background color, and this thing. So now both of the elements have been added something. Now if I add only padding to the individual element, what will happen, sir? It describes the amount of space that the text should have between it and its border. So if I add padding in the home button, right, so it will just have the space from the text, the inside text, to the border, right? So this is what padding represents. But let's say, but it didn't added the space that I wanted. I wanted the space between home button and the sign up button to be more. So if I want this thing, what I can do is I can add another property which is called margin. Let me remove the padding thing. If I add margin, and let's say if I keep margin as 10, now what will happen is basically you have added margin as 10 pixel. What it represents is basically any element that is closer to this particular home element, right? This particular div element that is there, inside which home is there. So this particular element should have the space of 10 pixel around all of its element. This is what the margin represents. Margin represents कि भाई any element that is closest to this particular home element, it should have the space of 10 pixels from the left, from the right, from the top, and from the bottom. Now that is the reason why this particular home button has a space of 10 pixel. But let's say if I just want the space not on the top, not on the left, not on the right, then what you can do is basically you can add margin to the bottom. And now this what it will do is basically it will just add space to the bottom. I hope this is clear, the difference between margin and padding. You guys have any doubt till now, like between margin, padding, and any other thing? Yep. All right. So if there is no doubt, let's continue our thing. So I hope all these properties are clear. Now, if you know all these properties, this is good enough to understand the first thing that we were covering today. That is, the CSS that it contains is basically the attributes and the values. Another thing, the very important thing that you should know is the flexbox, right? How do you position the elements? If you see Zerodha, there are two different elements. Let me just increase the screen. Now, if you see, there are two things here. In the same div element, there is a Zerodha logo on the left, and there are a few set of elements on the right. And the set of elements that are there on the right are, there is a lot of space in between them. So how do you how do you adjust that space? So we'll learn that, right? To know that, how do you bring the elements on the same line? That is so very simple. You can just add the span property, right? If you just want the line, the element should be on the same line. It is very simple. I can add sign up, I can add about, and now if I add another element which is span, and inside span, let's say if I am adding the image, what image, sir? This particular logo image. I already have this image, so I'll just add from here. So if I add image src, and the logo, I guess, is what represents this thing, right? So if I add logo.svg, right, so it will add all the elements on the top, right? This image is really big, so let us make it small. How can I make it small? There are two ways. One is just adding the direct attribute on the image property, which is width and height. Another way is, the better way is to add the style attribute, and inside style you can add this way. Too less, I guess. The width can be decreased, height can be decreased, I guess. Little more. Right. But the problem is, see, Zerodha image is there, and there are two elements in here. But if you see the Zerodha real one, right? So there is a lot of space in between them, and the next button that is there, all the buttons are aligned next to each other. We don't want all image and all the buttons to be on the same division, right? We want there should be little bit amount of space and then all these elements should come here. So let's try to build that. To add this thing, first thing that you need to know is we cannot use span. We can use span, but as I said earlier, it's always better to use div element, and then we'll add from there, right? Here I'll add the first thing, which is their image, and I'll replace this with logo.svg. Too much big, so let me remove the style one. I'll add 40, and here I'll add 40, right? So the image is already there, right? The next thing I want is a button which is on the right. To add that, what you can do is you can add another div element. Here if I write sign up thing, and now if I save and check, sign up is aligned next to the Zerodha. It is not on the same line. To add on the same line, I can just add the span button. But if you want it to be in the same thing, same line, the property that you can add here is called display property. So here is what display property does. If you add display, and now in display you can add all these properties, but the property we are learning is called flex. If you add display as flex and refresh, nothing happens because we have added at the wrong place. What display does, I'll just explain you in a second, but this is how you add. You can add style property, display is there, and now if you add flex, what will happen is display brings all the child elements next to each other. Display brings all the child elements next to each other. Now if I keep adding another element inside this particular parent div, if I add another element, and now if I refresh it, see all the spaces, all the elements that I add inside this particular parent div will come next to each other. If I keep adding more and more elements, and now if I refresh, all the elements will come next to each other. But that's not our goal. Our goal is that bhai, this thing should remain on the left, but all these things should remain on the right. So first solve this particular problem. How can I bring only this element, only sign up element on the left? Let's try to solve this and we'll go from there, right? Let's try to bring this particular sign up element on the right. So what we did so far, we added only div elements. So by default, it went down like one by one. It took the whole division. We added the property called display as flex on the parent element. Remember, you cannot add in the child element. It should be added in the parent element. So what it did, it basically brought all the elements stacked next to each other. Now, if I want to adjust this particular element, it has to go on the right. So I can add this thing. I can add display as flex. You have already added. You need to add this particular property called justify content. Now, this particular justify content can have various values that you can add. Now, if I want it to be, aligned like all to the right, all I can do is justify content. I can add first, let's see center. Now, if you see both the elements, that is the child element and all the child elements will be aligned at the center. If I add more elements in here, div and login, now if you see, all the elements will be to the center, right? This is what the display flux property does and justify content center does. But there are various other properties or values you can add to the justify content, right? To check that, you can add here flexbox. If you see, yes. So it's a good reference to check what each property does for justify content. So if you see flex start, what flex start does, it is the default thing. What flex start does is a default thing, which is basically it adds elements to the start. So all the elements that are stacked next to each other will be added onto the start that was happening. But if I want all the elements onto to the right, all the elements, all the child element to be on the right, what I can do is I can simply change flex start to the flex end. And now what it does is basically brought all the elements onto the right, right? This is what the flex start and flex end and the center element does. But apart from that, you can also add the space between property. If you add the space between property, and if you refresh, so all the elements will have the equal amount of space in between. So I had three children in my div element, so all the three divs are having the equal amount of space in between them. If I keep adding more and more div elements, if I keep adding more and more div elements, I can add about section. Right now, if I refresh, again the space in between them will be equal. So this is what the justify content space between value does, right? Now there is something else also. Like, let's say if you want कि भाई, don't start from the beginning, but whatever the space is there, it should be equal, not in between but from the beginning, right? Assume that there is an empty element at the start. To do so, what you can do is, instead of adding space between, you can add space around. And now this will add the space around amongst all the elements to be equal. So this is what the flexbox property does. What it does is, all you have to do is display as flex. This will assume that all the children elements will be stacked next to each other. And now to adjust that, you can use another property called justify content. And by using this particular property, you can adjust the space, how it should be aligned next to each other. You can add flex start if you just want all the elements to start from the beginning. You can add flex end, right? If you want all the elements to be at the end, you can add justify space between, right? If you want the space between all the elements should be same. If you add space around, all the elements from the beginning will have the equal amount of space. So this is what the flexbox property does, right? I hope this is clear. Obviously, now the thing, if you see now, this is somewhat similar to what we are getting to what we want, right? But the problem with this is, all the elements on the right from sign up till support are next to each other. All the elements on the left, that is only the logo part, is on the left, and there is a wide amount of space in between. What it means, basically, there is a logo on the left, right? If I remove all these elements, I am good, sir. I am good, right? So I have, so let me just change to space between, and now this will work. I have one element on the left, I have one element on the right, but as soon as I add another element here, if I add div login, so there is like equal amount of space. What I want is basically, okay, but the left element should be on the left, but all the elements on the right should be on the right, right? There should be actually no space in between them. To do so, what I can do is, I know, okay, bhai, this particular element, all these 4 5 elements can be come under one particular div, right? So what I'm trying to say is, basically, let's keep the image on the left. So this is on the left, but if I add here one more element, if I add one more element here, right, and if I remove this thing and close it here, now what will happen? Now the thing that happens is, basically, I haven't closed it properly, for sure. I haven't started it. Now what happens is, basically, the left image is on the left, but the right elements are on the right. That is true, but they are aligned. They are, stacked one after the other. We want them to be next to each other, right? To do so, what we can do is, basically, we can add display as flex to this parent property. Just give me a second. I'll drink water and come. All right. So what I was saying was, so these are all the properties that you can add to the flexbox. You can add from the start to the end, center, space between, space around, and space evenly. Right. Let's go to our page again. So this is what the case is. I want one of the child element on the left and another child element on the right. So let's just add all the elements and we'll see how we can get to exactly at this particular thing, right? I have sign up, I have about. So let me add about, and then I have products, pricing, and support. Products, support, and yep, that's it, I guess. Sign up, about, products, pricing is left out. So let me add pricing. And now if I see my page, how it looks is basically I have one element on the left. I have set of elements which are stacked one after the other to each, right? Now if I want all of them to be on the same line, now if I want to add all of them into the same line, just to make it clear, let's add a background color to the parent div. Let's add the background color to the parent div. This is how you actually, debug in CSS, basically by adding the background color. In JavaScript, when you'll come there, you'll understand the way to debug is by adding the logs. But in CSS, you add the background color to check by how much amount of space is taken by each of the elements. So this is what is being done. Now remember what I've said. To bring all the elements one after the other, all you can do is to the parent element, of the individual elements. The individual elements are to sign up से लेके support तक, right? To bring them next to each other, what you can do is add this property. You can add display as flex. Now if I save it, and now if I refresh, all of them are next to each other. So you see, okay, by Zerodha is on the left, all the elements are on the right. So this is what we have achieved till now. Obviously this is not really good, but we can add padding and margin to make it, exactly look like this one. All right, I hope this is clear. Now to add the from here it's pretty easy, I guess, to add this thing. Now let's try to solve this thing. I have few elements, right? What I did, I added the display as flex to the parent element, right? And now I added that the space in between you can add. I can add justify content space between, right? It will remain same because I haven't added margin here. So the space taken by the individual elements is same. So that is why you cannot see any effect for this particular property, right? So I think this is finished. This is really good. Now to make it more clear to this particular thing, what we can do is basically try to align individual elements and we'll go from there. So Zerodha looks, the width is really less. So let me just add a little bit more of width. So if I make it 150 and decrease the height a little bit, more height can be decreased, right? So I think we are closer to this one. Now if you see, now let's try to add the space in between the individual elements. To do so, what I can do, as I said here earlier, if you want okay, by the space between this element to the next element, you can add as what you can add is margin. But if you want okay, by the whole element and the padding, you can and the individual elements between the border and the element, you can add what you can add is basically padding, right? What we need here is the margin. Why? Because this is sign up is individual element, about is individual element, products are individual elements, pricing and all of them are individual elements. So what I need is a space between to the left of individual elements, or you can say to the right of the individual elements. So let's go to sign up element, right? And here if I add the style attribute, here I can add margin I just want the margin on the left, right? I just want the margin on the left, or rather right, let's say. And let's add 20 and see how it goes there. Yeah, I think this looks good. As we require more, we can add more. So let me just copy paste to all the individual elements. Nope. We can add more margin, I guess. Right now, this looks really similar to this one. Still, the thing is, if you see here, the space between the top and the left and to the right and to the bottom is very high. So to do so, what I can do is basically the parent element, I can add the padding. What the padding does to the whole of the element, the space between the inside elements from the border, to add that, what I can do is add padding in here, right? If I add padding, but before adding padding, I need to add the colon, right? Padding. So let's add on the top and see how it is working. Now if I refresh, padding is added on the top. Now I need on the bottom as well, and left and right. So let's add individual paddings. So let's keep padding to the bottom as well, same. It is not seen because you don't have any background color or border, but the padding is added onto the bottom, right? If you want to see really, you can add the background color again and see from there, right? So this, there is a space in between from the elements, individual elements, to the bottom of the border, right? So this is what the padding does. But apart from that, I need one more thing. What I need is the space between the left and the right. So let's add the padding to the left and right. So before doing that, let me remove this thing. Padding left will add this thing. Left doesn't do really good for me. 20 is also not working, so let's add 30. Let's add 40. Sort of same. Let me add more. Let me add padding to the right as well. 50, same. Right. Now this looks very similar to this one. Let me just remove the color, individual color that I've added. Now if I save it, refresh this one, I have something similar to this one, right? But if you see the color of the text, it is not exactly the black. So the by default, whatever the color you get is black. I can change this one. This looks slightly grayish, so let's add that to individual elements. Color, if I add gray, sort of same, but the green is very high in this particular thing. So let me add in hexadecimal. If you see, this works, I guess. So let us add to all the elements. Now if you refresh, this looks very similar to this one. You might argue, okay, bhai, there is the space in between is more, so you can add more. So let's do that. Padding just by space between, margin right. So I think this will, if I increase this one, right. So now I think we are very close to this one for this thing. The only thing that is missing is this particular thing. Now if you click on this one, you have set of things. To add this thing, basically you need JavaScript. So let's not add this one. I'll just stick to this one, right? But before going forward, you might see here there's like a small line. Basically a shadow is there, right? So to add the shadow, what you can do is you can add another property called box shadow. I need the shadow on the whole thing, right? I need the bottom of the shadow onto the whole of the element. To add the shadow, I can go to the most parent element, right? Here I can add box shadow. And now this is also important. It takes three individual values, 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 1 pixel, and the last thing it takes is basically your color, the color you want to give. I can give this thing. Now if I refresh this one, now you can clearly see that there is the shadow that is being added to this particular box, which looks very similar to this one. This is slightly transparent, but this is slightly more, it can be seen clearly. Now you might wonder, okay, by what these individual values might be, right? So you can play around with it. So let's just play around and check ourselves, okay, by what does these individual values actually represent. If I increase the first value 10 pixel, you can see on the right, okay, by the shadow on the right is being added by the first value. Let me keep that to as 1 pixel. So this is the default thing, it's gone. Right. Now, if I increase the second value, the shadow on the bottom increases, right? So what we can infer from this is basically the second value represents, okay, by how much amount of shadow you want onto the bottom, right? Let us go to the default settings and now increase the shadow to the third value. This represents basically the third shadow represents, okay, by how much amount of shadow you want to all of your four borders, right? So the third thing represents the shadow specifically onto the whole four borders. If I increase it more, what will happen? It will add the shadow more. So this particular element looks like it got popped out, right? So this is what the third value does. The first value, it will just add the, now if I remove this one, and this is the default thing, right? The first thing will add the shadow to the right? Now if I add it to the -1, -10 pixel, what will happen? It will add shadow to the left. So if you want to add the shadow to the right, use the first value in the positive way, just like plus axis, x-axis of the positive one, right? So positive axis you keep increasing. If you go to the negative axis, it will go on to the left one, right? So let me keep it on to the default one, 1 pixel. You can consider this, right? You might already guess, okay, what will happen if I make this 11 as -11? It will add shadow onto the top. So again, the positive y-axis and negative y-axis. So the x-axis, left and right, y-axis, bottom and top, and the third thing is basically the actual shadow to the whole thing, right? So this is what the box shadow property does. Here you can change the color. Let me change it. Now if I refresh it, what happens? There is slightly lesser color. It's closer to white, but it's not exactly white, right? So let me make it as 1 pixel. I think this will work for us, right? So now this looks very similar to this particular thing. I think we have added the box shadow also. But now you might see, okay, by all these elements, when I decrease the browser size, all these elements on the right are gone, right? But for us, it's still there. Why? Because our website is not responsive, right? What do you mean by responsive website? Is basically if you open YouTube, right, on the Chrome, on your laptop or on your TV or on your mobile screen, it will be complete, the display will be completely different. That is what you call a responsive website is. So if I decrease the size for this particular website, right, if I decrease the size, the elements will be gone. So this is what they said, okay, bhai, if it is for this amount of pixel, keep the elements, right? If you decrease it further, just remove all the elements. So this is what the responsive website means. We'll learn there, I mean, when we are actually writing a good project, right? So I hope this is clear, okay, by the elements on the right, the elements on the left. From now on, it is very simple, I guess. Next thing that we need to add is this particular image. We already have this image in our repository. If I go to my folder, I have this thing, right? Let's add that image. I'll go here. I'll add image src. I'll add landing png. Right now, if I see it's too big, so let's decrease its width and height. The one way is, you can always add the width and height properties attributes directly, but the better way is, you just add the style attribute, and here you add the width and height. So if I add it here, 300 and height being 200, so let's see, two less, uh, still less. But before doing that, let's try to make it center, right? The the naive way that we have learned already is by using the center tag. So you put anything in center tag, it will be centered, right? If I now do this thing, this is in center, right? But this is not what it works. Basically, here you can already see a red squiggly because center tag is basically discontinued for HTML version 5, right? So for some browser, this tag might work. For some browser, it may not, right? So this is the worst way. So don't add the center tag. Rather, what you can do is add a div, wrap this particular element into the div, right? Now, if I wrap it, nothing happens. It's still the same. Now, if I want to make it center, remember what we can do is basically add the display. So many things added. So let me just remove the unnecessary things. Right. Now I can add justify content center. Now what it will do, it will basically bring the whole of the inner element to the center. If I add more elements, all the elements will be stacked next to each other and it will still remain the center, right? So hopefully this is clear. But this image is slightly not has the same exact width that we want. So let's add more width, more width, more width could be added, I guess. Right now this looks very similar to this one, but the problem is, as you might already guess, is that the space between this image and the top of your element is not very high. So let's try to add the space. The naive way again is basically adding the br tags. Yeah, right. So if you add the br tag, let me just close it, right? So this comes little to the next of the line. I can add more br tags. Now it comes again down, but the better approach is basically, okay, by this particular element is there, it is taking the whole space, right? The better way is, by adding the padding or the margin. I want this whole element. Now currently the element is stacked next to this particular the whole element, right? If I want to bring it down, basically the margin between this particular element and the margin between the top element should be more. To add that, I can do is margin top 10 pixel. If I add and see, there is a clear space in between them. You can add more, I guess. So if I add it to 40, this slightly makes it very similar to this particular web page, right? I hope this is clear. Till now it is clear. Do you guys have any doubt till now? Are we clear from here till here? All right. So I think this is clear. Now from here, there are very simple things. I think we can add it quickly. What you have to do is basically you need to add this thing. So you add a h1 tag, invest in everything, right? So if you see here, again the problem is, this is not really at the center. To do that, what you can do is basically wrap this whole thing into the div and style it display flex, justify content, and center. This will bring it in the between. And the color is also, slightly grayish. So let's change the color, right? Color, if I change it, this will work, right? So now it is really similar to this one, but still, the font that is being utilized here is different from this particular font. So this is an easy thing to add, right? Next thing we have is basically this particular thing. So let me just copy it quickly, and let's try to keep it here only, right? Div, and now if I add it here, loaded the wrong page. Something is not clear, so let's remove this. Let's just keep it div, because there are a few inline elements and there are few block elements. Block elements basically represent कि भाई the amount of should it take the whole division or should it take only what it requires. So this is the inline elements, block elements. The inline elements basically it will take the only space whatever is required. So div by default is block element. Inline element example is the span element, which takes only the amount of space it requires. This is gone. I assume I'm missing something here. Dev starts, dev ends here, dev again starts. Somewhere it is being missed. Okay, so it's here already, but it is aligned next to each other. So the worst one thing what I can do is basically bring this down, right? I can do this thing and make it again h1, right? h1. Now if I refresh, this is there. Now I can again add here display style, display flex, and now justify content to make it center. If I refresh it, it comes again here. Let me change the color also. Color, color is this one. If I refresh it, this is close to this one. We are getting close, right? The last thing that is left out is your button, right? The problem with the button is basically this is a simple button, and we'll be adding the border radius. So this is something great to add. So if I add button, right, button is also a tag. What it is basically, if I add here sign up for free, and now if I refresh the button, a button is added which looks very ugly. First of all, let's make it center, right? I have this ADHD. If I see things which are not really aesthetic, I don't like it. So let me add style, display, flex, justify content, center. Saved. Refresh it. Now it's here. Now let's try to add the border radius. First of all, let's add the background color, which looks blue, and the text color, which is white. So let's add these two things first. Background color was blue. Really bad with the colors. I need to change it. Maybe this works. I don't know. Right. Oh, sorry. My bad. We need to add background color inside the button, not in the parent div, right? So let's copy this one. Go here, style, add this one. This looks very ugly, right? So let's continue with this one. I'll add background color is there. Color I need to add white. Now what I did is basically I removed the border. Border as none means basically you don't need border. If I remove this thing, if I remove this thing and save it, basically this border is there by default. So I need to keep it as border as none. Border as none. If I refresh, this is there. But now if you see, two things we need to add here. One is the margin. Why we need it? The margin is basically this particular text is there. The space between them is very less. I need to add the space between the element and another element. I'll add the margin. And margin to the top, not to the left and the bottom, right? Margin, if I add to the top, margin to the top, if I add, and if I add 20 pixel, I think we have decent margin. Now I need to add padding as well. Padding to the whole sides. Let's keep it 4 pixels. Let's add more. I can add more, and in fact I can increase the width as well. Not really, sir. All right, so this is done. The last thing we need to add is basically you could see that it is a squared button. So let's add some border radius to make it rounded. All right, I think it has slight amount of radius, but let's add more to make it more visible. Too much. Still a lot. Still a lot. So we are back to 5 pixels. I think this works. So yeah, that's it. I think we are very close to this particular web page. We have already designed a good decent amount of css we did. We covered like a lot of properties. We covered what how box shadow could be played out. How do you position the elements, stack next to each other if you wanted to, stack one after the other. If you want few elements onto the right, few elements onto the left, then what we saw is border radius and border, right? Few things here are missing. Basically, if you hover over on this particular element, this here it changes to this particular hand, but here it remains on as if you are clicking on some text. To change this, you can add quickly. Let me quickly add this property. What you can do is basically add cursor as pointer, cursor property and pointer value. If I refresh it now if you see, this is again getting changed to the hand. Still, this remains still in the text one. So we can add to all of them, right? So this is the thing. Another thing is basically you could see here, okay, when I hover onto this particular element, the color is getting changed, right? This thing is there. Here also onto the button you can see, okay, when I hover onto the button, the background color is getting changed, right? So this is not what we have learned. So I would urge you, okay, try to learn these two things. Okay, whenever you hover onto something, how you can change the properties and the values for that particular button. Hovering property is very important because I can give you set of examples, right? If I hover onto this particular thing, onto the bottom, you can see, okay, what is the whole web page. There are what this whole web page looks like, the URL of this particular web page. So yeah, so go from there and try to implement few properties for display as flex, because it is really important that you learn. Let me just try to show you what you can try to build as an assignment. YouTube. Yeah, try to build this thing. This is very simple thing. What you have is you have set of buttons on the left, right? You have set of buttons. When I hover onto it, there is a it turns into grayish. The background color turns into the grayish, right? You have the top bar is the most important thing. The top bar and the left bar. If you could build this thing, this is this means you have really understood how the flexbox actually works. I can give you some hints. Basically, these two elements can come under one element, the search bar and the mic button. How you can add this is basically you can go to this thing, SVG logos for search bar, right? Go to this particular thing, find the YouTube search bar here. Most likely you'll get YouTube search bar. Not here. Let's just add search bar. Not this web page. YouTube search bar SVG. Yeah, so you can use the image of any one of this image, right? This need not be an actual search bar. If it is, it's really good, but this could be just an image. You add this thing, another logo you can add for the mic button. Don't worry about this thing, but you can surely add this particular button. Don't worry about how you can add the individual logo of this thing, but try to build this thing. Okay, by these two elements on the left, this is in between, and this on right, and then you have set of elements on to the left one, and then finally this thing. This how you can add all these things. If you learn, this is really good, right? I hope that is clear. You guys have any doubt? Tomorrow we'll be covering the JavaScript, right? We'll start with basic functions in the JavaScript. How do you write the loops in JavaScript? And hopefully, if we get the time, we'll also cover the async await, which is very specific to JavaScript. So if we learn that, it means we have covered most of what we need to know the JavaScript, right? So try to just skim through what are the important parts of JavaScript are, like how JavaScript was built, what was the reason for building the JavaScript and all, right? I hope today's class was clear. If you guys have any doubt, you can ask. Do you guys want me to push this on GitHub so you guys can use the code base, the code for this one? Just say yes or no. Hello. All right. So let me quickly push this to GitHub. Right. Let me go here. The way to do is basically very simple. If you have Git, you can do along with me, so it becomes clear to you how to use Git. So the first command that I enter is git init, which basically initializes a Git repository, which is .git folder is initialized in this particular folder. You cannot see it. Why? Because this particular folder is hidden. So any folder that start with dot is basically the hidden folder. You can probably see uh, less hyphen a. Wait a minute. C hidden folders Linux. So anything you don't know or you want to see, it's always better to just use just Google it. PowerShell. The terminal I'm using is PowerShell. Let's see if this works. Right now, if I put ls hyphen force, it shows me there is an empty Git folder. Let's try to go in it. Right now, I'm inside this particular folder. Now, if I want to see what all it contains, it has few hooks, info, object refs and all these things. So let's not get there. The first command that I entered was get init, right? Get init. It's already initialized, so it reinitialized simply. The first thing, the next thing that you need to add is basically your GitHub repository. So I don't have any GitHub repository, so let me just quickly create it. I go to my GitHub, create a new repository, add here HTML Zerodha web page, right? You can keep it public or private. Create the repository. Now copy this particular URL and add it here, so that your Git gets to know, okay, by what particular repository or where do I need to push. So I add git remote add origin and the URL. So now this particular Git repository is actually linked with this particular repository that is there on my GitHub. Next things, few things are there. These are the repeated things that you do once you have initialized and linked your repository, which is git add dot, or you can add individual files. I can say index.html. I can add just index.html, right? Or I can do git add dot. Dot will add all the subdirectories in this particular folder, right? Git add, git commit hyphen m, the message that you want to commit, right? The record first mini project, right? Once this is done, git push. This won't work because we don't have the upstream repository. So what I can do is git push origin master. The actual branch that I have is master one. All right, so now this is pushed. If you see here, if I refresh my page, I already have this thing, right? So these are like some simple steps how you can add, commit, and push your code to repositories, right? So once you do your assignment, hopefully that is the YouTube one, try to create the repository, try to push it to your GitHub. Basically, the thing that you should know is basically whenever the recruiter comes to your GitHub page, the thing he looks at is basically your chart of how active you are. If I see here, if I go to my web page, if I see here 2025, so all these green things will tell you, how many contributions you did in this particular year. This is not really a lot because after this November, I was really active on my office work. So basically, I'm pushing to my office account, not to this particular account. I should be more active, honestly, right? So this is what the recruiter sees, right? So mostly it should be green. Not, you're not forcing anybody to, you are making the random commits daily. You should not do that. But something, a valuable commit, right? A valuable commit is good because he sees. You can also, obviously people do this thing also. Okay, right? Every day, just create a repository and push it. So for the whole year, it looks green, right? That's a bad practice. Recruiter can easily understand by going through your whole set of repositories and where all you have committed or where you have contributed, by seeing ke bhai, how active this particular person is. So it's a good idea ke bhai, whatever code you're writing, push it to your GitHub, right? So that's it. All right, if you guys don't have any doubt, let's end this class here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye. All right. Thank you, Hassan. Thanks for arranging this. Thank you. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.